What's up, everybody? Today we're looking at my orchestral template. I've had a few folks on YouTube as well as my Discord server ask about what does my orchestral template look like. And this is for literally anything that I do that's orchestral. So today we're just going to do a little bit of a walkthrough. And mostly we're going to be covering three things, right? The instruments that I use, how I actually have the track lists set up, and then also just general mix bus kind of template things. So without further ado, let's get into the Tony Manfredonia orchestral template. All right, so I've just opened up my template here, and basically here we go. This is generally what I use. This is generally what I start with. I sort of call this the Berlin CSS orchestra template. You'll notice that there are no choirs here. There's no choir set up, only because, to be honest, when I'm loading a bunch of new projects, I want the loading speed to be pretty quick, and I don't use Vienna Ensemble Pro for a variety of reasons, so I want to minimize the loading times, right? And I would say that most tracks don't use choir. Some do, but most don't, right? So I always start with, what am I using the most, right? And so generally I've got my woodwinds, I've got my brass, I've got some drums, I got timpani and harp, mallet percussion, solo violin, Joshua Bell violin, and then really all my strings, right? Mostly I'm kind of sitting with Cinematic Studio strings, and then Omnisphere for any synth pad hybrid needs. Sometimes I'll use Massive as well, like I'm working on a track for my next album that's pretty much exclusively Noir piano, Cinematic Studio strings, and a Massive patch. Like, that's it. I like to keep things fairly organic. That's usually what I'm asked to do from a client soundtrack perspective, as well as pretty much like pure orchestra. So let's walk this through. We've got our woodwinds here, got our brass, soloists, and you'll notice that I have one track per instrument, okay? The reason I do this is because I use expression maps. That'll be the second part of this video, so just know that that's coming. But I use one track per instrument, pretty much. There are times where I split it up, but for the most part, it's pretty much like, here's my bass drum, right? Here's my horn 1, which this will contain all of my horn 1 material. Here's my horn 3, all of my horn 3 material. So anyway, but let's go over the instruments. I have here Berlin woodwinds, right? So I set it up as follows, right? I have one instance of sine for all my woodwinds, okay? I pretty much don't use any other woodwind patch, like, ever, except it's like the soloist patch, also from Berlin. I find this covers all my needs nicely. So I've got Berlin woodwinds, soloists, which I love. They're just, the expression on these is just, they're stunning. They're recorded well. They never fail me. So those are my soloists for any kind of real soloistic expressive moments. Berlin brass, again, they kind of keep me company. Pretty much always use them. Same idea. I've got my sine player here. I always load everything just the tree mic, kind of the default. Spot mics, surround mics, any other sort of extraneous mics like this, extra mics, it's usually as needed, right? I like to, again, I keep things fairly default in my template. Tree mics by default, which is almost 9.9 times out of 10 it works. Every now and then I need to load up a spot mic. But other than that, it's working well, just trees. Same thing with percussion, but percussion I have it split up a little bit differently. It's Berlin percussion. I kind of split it up between drums and then mallets, right, or more metal auxiliary stuff, just to help processing power with multiple instances and also routing, right? There's only so many outputs that I can use. So here are my mallets and my aux percussion, gong, and all of that stuff. And then damage 2, I literally just have 2 instances. Sometimes I'll load up some more, but I've got the ensemble, which is sort of the ones you play, and then the loops, right? So the loops are the ones that you just hold down a button or a key, and it just kind of loops, right? These are a great starting point, but if I need something a bit more specific, I have the ensemble here as well, which is much more, customizable, so to speak. Then timpani and harp, I use the Berlin timpani that comes with Berlin percussion. I think it's great. It's a little bit mid-rangey. Not here to talk about mixing, but it's a little bit woofy and papery sounding, but generally it's really good. Same thing, Berlin harp that came with the symphonic strings. I don't use the Berlin symphonic strings as much if ever, these days, unless I'm doing something like just to thicken out the bass line a bit. I find the Berlin Symphonic cello is really good. But again, mostly I'm using Cinematic Studio strings. But the harp is really good. I like the harp tone. Harp is nice. And then my piano, right? I have Berlin piano, but I find this is really only good for, in fact, I have one tune on a soundtrack that'll be coming out in a few years from now, where I started with this, and it's like one of the opening tracks of the game, where it's a bit more soloistic, and I used the Berlin piano, and that made it to the end of the soundtrack. Like, it made it to the final product. But literally every track after that, I then went to noir, because it's much better for more soloistic writing. I find it's really, you can really shape it nicely. You can tonally shape it. You can make it warmer, brighter. It's a bit more customizable, whereas Berlin piano is just, it's almost like ensemble writing, right? So if you're doubling a high woodwind line, for example, and you need something that kind of has a lot of mid-range gut to it, Berlin piano is nice for that. Solo violin these days, if I can, I try to actually just hire a violinist if budget allows. But again, that soundtrack I mentioned, a lot of solo violin in here, does use Joshua Bell violin, for better or for worse. It's good. It has its issues. It has its dynamic issues. I feel it's a little flat at times, but I really like it. I really like it. It's also really good for doubling, if you need some more detail out of the, CSS violin one line. Joshua Bell's really good at kind of adding a bit more detail there. Admittedly, I rarely touch Berlin first chairs. I have them here because it's just kind of a big Berlin template, but I haven't touched it probably in a couple of years. Berlin string sound effects, I use these all the time. Like all the time. They're great. Really good aleatoric, really good aleatoric string writing. Clusters and glissandos and runs and anything sound effecty with strings. These are very good. Very good. That's all I can say. Concertino strings, same thing. I'll use these when I want concertino. That Cinematic Studio strings doesn't do quite as well. I'm almost certain that the CSS concertino button here is literally just an EQ. Like, I'm pretty sure that's what it does. So I don't use that as much. Now let's talk CSS. This is my go-to string library at this point. I have my qualms with it, which I'll get to in another video if people are interested. I know it's kind of seen as like the end-all be-all string library, which it does some things really good, but it also has its most annoying, like, I feel frustrated because I'm like, man, this lush legato is so good, but at quiet dynamics, it sounds like there's white noise, right? And it's not just bow rosin. It's like literally room noise. So I get really frustrated with it, but it's also kind of my workhorse. It's also like I've learned to kind of work around it. You'll notice that I don't use the default mic positions with CSS. This is literally out of this entire template. CSS is the only library that I have different mic positions loaded up. And you'll see they're pretty weird and crazy, like spot mic 100% left, 100% right. But there's a reason I do this, and they help beef them up. If you want me to go into detail with these, and I will, I can talk about CSS if you're curious. But just know that my default mic positions it's not just the ones that come by default when you turn it on. Like these are customized. CSS though, I pretty much use this. And again, same thing. Got one track per articulation. No, one track per instrument, not per articulation. Which leads me to why I do this. All right, let's talk about it. Just a quick plug as we go through this template. If you want to discuss more things like this, feel free to join my Discord server. We have conversations about all this stuff all the time, and I would love to see you there. So it is there in the description below. All right, back to the template. It's worth noting that the way I write my music is not straight into the DAW, with some exceptions. When I'm making music for Audulon Online Adventures, formerly Evercraft, that soundtrack is a bit, you can't approach the orchestra with that soundtrack in the same way because it's like retro orchestra. It's like old school PC orchestra. So if I were to write something like this, for example, in Audulon Online Adventures, it would just sound like a mess because it would just sound way too dense. So that is the only one where I very frequently write into the DAW because I'm literally using way less samples despite it being quote unquote orchestral. All right. Now, for a soundtrack like Horizons of Achaia, which is all very legitimate, as if I was writing for an acoustic ensemble orchestra. That's how I approach it. For the other soundtrack that I mentioned before that I can't talk about, Call of Saragnar, when I did stuff for Minecraft, all of that, everything that is sort of realistic orchestra, so to speak, I do straight into notation because that's how I see it. That's how I visualize it. So when I'm looking at this, so for example, let's say I am working on this, okay? Here's some string stuff. I'm trying to move it. There we go. Here's some string stuff. The reality is like, this is how I think about articulations. This is how I view the music. So what I do is, as I get all the notes in here in Sibelius, okay? It takes me faster, actually, than to try and do realistic orchestra straight into a DAW. So if let's say I load this up, I get all my notes down in Sibelius, which takes me faster than trying to play things in and compose that way. I got no judgments about anyone who does anything differently, but just know that this is how I do it. This here is what I will then see, okay? So I extract it from Sibelius. This is what I see, all right? So what I do is I highlight everything, I glue everything together. I don't like the weird spaces in between. Again, don't ask me why, I just don't. I glue it all together, and then I will highlight everything, function, MIDI, functions, delete continuous controllers, because I don't want any panning, I don't want any of that stuff in there. So just to show you, if I go to, say, my piano here, or whatever it is, my violin one, okay, if I didn't delete all that MIDI data, there would be way more here. These don't actually affect things too much, I delete them anyway, but if I don't do that, this is what I come out with, right? So it has panning information, it has volume information, it has other information. I don't want any of that. So I delete all the CC data. Then what I can do is I can take my violin one, go here. And now I'm officially not even thinking about writing music. I am just looking at this from a purely practical perspective. So knowing this is, for example, right over here. Yep. Kind of sounds like simple gifts. 'Tis the gift to be simple. Now that I think about it. Anyway, there it is. I know I got measured tremolo. So I will go through and I will delete all these. Right? I'll get rid of all the sort of added notes that Sibelius puts in there. I will highlight them. I will click it. And I will do measured tremolo. Right? And now I can play with velocity. Right? I can draw on my velocity, whatever I need to do. But the articulation's there. I'm not thinking about the notes and actually writing them. I'm just thinking about how to produce it. It's my kind of workflow that I find it helps my brain. It's also worth noting that I don't do negative delay. So for example, I know for a fact this wouldn't be on the beat. So I literally just highlight the things and I go like this, boom. And I just time it to, if I enable my click track and play it, you know, that's just, I don't use negative delay. I know Cubase 15, which I don't have yet, has negative delay per articulation, which is really, really cool. Because mostly when I'm dealing with these expression maps, see here, also known as articulation sets with Logic, what's really nice is that once I have it set up, it's like I have everything that I need. Then I can go through and say, okay, I know for we got like a ba 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 da 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 dum da 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 dum. So I know for sure this is going to be staccato, so I'll highlight that. I know for sure this is all going to be legato, so I'll highlight this, whatever, make sure that this is set to arco, okay? And then this is more like a fast run, right? So I'll overlap that, and I know CSS uses the Marcato fast run there. So this is generally what I'm doing. So again, same thing. We got a run that goes up, use the Marcato articulation for runs with CSS. Then of course I would delete all these here and set these to measured trem, play with the velocity as needed. Anyway, this is what I do. So I take however long it takes to go through this whole thing, right? Instrument by instrument. And of course I listen along the way. But again, I'm not thinking about the notes. I'm not worrying about the orchestration at this point. It's all written. It's just making it sound good. All right? So, expression maps, I find personally, few things people may say is, well, how do you mix it? Do you mix it differently? At the end of the day, like there's nothing you can't mix that can't be automated, right? So people like to have their output for their shorts and their output for their longs. But really, when it comes to shorts and longs, especially when it's shorts in the middle of a phrase like this, ya da da, you know, maybe I want this to be kind of a marcato with overlay, da 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 da. That to me, it's like, okay, if I had all these shorts on a different output and processed differently, I would feel like it's too disjointed because it's all meant to be within the same phrasing. Okay, and CSS and the Berlin series are usually pretty good when it comes to the length of shorts versus longs. Like, I don't really run into too many issues Maybe some Marcato patches with Berlin are a little bit longer than I'd like, but you can work around it. But this way, for example, if I then have, we go into this measured tremolo stuff, this back and forth, well, what I can do is, let's say I want it to be a little bit punchier, a little bit shorter. I can get a transient shaper, right? Or a compressor, which effectively do the same thing in two different ways, right? I could get a transient shaper, let's say on my violas, and have this preset to I want more attack and less sustain out of it. Let's make it a little bit more balanced. Have this mix knob off, right? Then when I get to this point, I can do my right automation. Boom, we turn that on for that moment because that's the processing I want. Or even if I wanted to have it EQ'd a little bit differently, it's just a singular output that I could have an EQ, right? If whatever I'm doing here, I could have my EQ if I wanted a bit more bite, let's say, a little bit more brightness out of that. Okay, same thing. I have the gain scale off, and then when I want it on, I automate it on. So at the end of the day, I find having so many different outputs for so many different things, when I'm trying to get a natural orchestral sound, ends up making it feel a little bit more disconnected and a little bit more disjointed. So that's the reasoning for me why I use single tracks per instrument plus expression maps. So far, it's worked for me. Again, no judgments with whatever you want to do, but for me, I find this is just much more easily visual. I can visualize it much easier. And what's really nice about the Berlin series is let's say I have a passage that only uses horn 1, 3, and 4 because horn 2 I'm reserving for somewhere else. I can treat it as if I'm doing that like a live orchestral performance, and I can treat it like I'm doing it acoustically, which is what most of my training was before I even knew what Cubase was, right? So for me, this is just how I think about it. Same thing, using one bassoon versus two bassoons. I know there are ensemble patches out there, but a lot of times they'll be just solo bassoon, and it's kind of the same recording. So this allows me to, again, it's two different patches. So if I want to have them in unison and then not in unison, there's no weird phasing issues. It just works out nicely. This is mostly why I use the Berlin winds and brass, to be completely honest. The sound is good. They do sound good, but there's also that reality of how I think about orchestration. It just helps me. It helps me with that process. Now let's talk about the actual mix console. I'm a firm believer, personally. I try not to preload too much, right? These little things I just added here right now, all these little plugins. But generally, when I open up my template, this is sort of what I see, okay? There are things that I know I will use, like for this, for example, Go False Master. I know for sure I'll be using that. This on Cinematic Studio Strings, I know I'll be using this, but I have it all set to 0, right? Nothing. The doubler trick, long story about what this is, but my doubler that I use for my strings to make them wider and feel more expansive, I know for sure I'll be using that. Tape, I may or may not use, but generally I probably end up using it because it just helps with strings, especially. Go False, I know I'm going to be using those, so they're there. They're not active, but they're there. I try not to go too crazy with preloaded EQs because every track is going to be different. So if I had all sorts of crazy EQs here and panning presets and everything is sort of ready to go, I may be spending so much time undoing what's already in the template, right? So I prefer to just kind of leave it blank. My routing is pretty straightforward. I pretty much do high winds, low winds, and then all winds. And then soloists separately. High brass, low brass, brass. High strings, low strings, strings. Again, I don't go too crazy. What can you do through the production itself to make it sound the most organic and then automate things as needed for specific moments on the individual instruments? That's sort of my approach. This just helps with, again, this kind of helps offset the doubler trick with the low end, so the low end doesn't feel too wide. But generally, there's not much there that's preloaded. Tonal balance control, which is, obviously nice. Pro tip, modern preset for orchestra music, or bass heavy for orchestra music. Do not use the orchestral preset because that is generally not going to sound very good. I think this was designed more so for classical recordings. Anyway, another topic for another video. And then reverb, same thing. I keep my reverb pretty straightforward. Cinematic Room's Hall, my reverb time depends on the speed of the track. It's generally going to be between 1.8 and 2.3. If it's faster, it's quicker reverb. If it's slower, it's longer reverb. Fairly straightforward, sort of a secondary reverb just to help glue things together, like a little Percassi style with a slightly different pre-delay, just to add more kind of natural reflection time differences so it feels a bit more realistic. Plate for my percussion with various timings. Sometimes I don't even use reverb on some percussion, like Damage 2 is really roomy. I may do a tail in a little bit of Hall just to kind of glue it together, but I don't go crazy. Or I may just do a whole separate reverb specific for that. Again, percussion is its own beast, so I don't really preload too much percussion preset reverbs, only because they vary from track to track. And then I do have, for example, like I route all my trumpets to a trumpets group, I route all my horns to a horns group, and trombones to a trombone group. Same thing with strings, violins to a violin group, and so forth. But really, that's it. I mean, like I try not to have my template too overcomplicated. Again, this is almost always what I'm going to be using. And then I have a few added strings for if I need it. And then I don't even load the things that I may or may not use, even for my rock or pop music, right? Because I guarantee I'm going to be recording guitar, I'm going to be recording bass guitar. If I'm using drums, I'll load up a drum kit depending on the style of drums. Maybe it's Tune Track Easy Drummer, maybe it's a bit more electric percussion. So it just depends on what I need that I don't want to preload to save loading times. Even in my pop production, it's still fairly orchestra heavy. Like it's not too synthetic. So if I need synths, I'll add them. But like, again, listen to any of my albums or any of my, not soundtrack work. And it's pretty much like, here's an orchestra with some synths and some rock ensemble as needed. Or like purely orchestra and piano, right? I keep things organic. Anyway, this is my template. I hope this is maybe enlightening. I don't know. Maybe you're shaking your fist at me on the other side of the screen. Who knows? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you want me to walk through a bit more actual, like how to do Berlin, how to do CSS, how to do XYZ, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, everybody. And I will talk to you all soon. Take care.